Welcome to Cultural Concerts on Colfax 2021 season. I'm Dr. Renee Fajardo with Metropolitan State University of Denver Chicano Studies Journey Through Our Heritage team. For the past 11 years, we have been very honored to be one of the sponsors of this amazing series. The Colorado Folk Arts Council and the Chicano Humanities Arts Council, along with the Aurora Fox, have been holding these free concerts for the past 25 years during the academic school year. That's right, this series is a quarter of a century old. Last season, due to the global pandemic, we had to cancel part of our season. But due to the innovation of the Aurora Fox, this year we are able to offer this series to you virtually. To all of those that are joining us, to our partners, and to the SCFD, we welcome you to the Cultural Concerts on Colfax 2021 season.
Today, my name is Kimberly Sanchez, and I'm here to share with you my book, Love and Legacy, Amor Eterno, and some of the Sephardic Jewish traditions from northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. How did I get started with all of this? Well, actually, first of all, I do want to thank Renee, Dr. Renee Fajardo from Journey Through Our Heritage, and the Aurora Fox Theater for this wonderful opportunity and for bringing me and Elena Claver to you all today. So how did I get started doing the research on Sephardic Jewish ancestry? Well, when I went to college, it was sort of an identity crisis that kind of just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was questioned about why I called myself Spanish. I was questioned about why I spoke Spanish the way that I did and why we ate the foods that we ate and all of these different things. And so it sort of led me on a quest to understand the identity of the people where I'm from. The oldest town in Colorado is San Luis. And so I did my senior thesis on the identity of the people from San Luis, and I went home and did a bunch of surveys and interviews with the people from the town. And the first time I heard something about Judaism and the Jewish identity was from a man, a business owner in Main Street, and his name was Charlie Mondragon. And so we're talking about, identities, different types of identities, Chicano, Spanish, all of these different things. And he says, well, actually, he said, we're Jewish. And I said, oh, really? Okay. I just kind of wrote down the information and kind of just let it slide off my back and just kept going with my research. I really didn't think anything of it. I hadn't known anybody Jewish until I went to college, and so it wasn't really anything that I kind of adhered to. And then in college, the only other girl that sort of spoke the way that I spoke was from Walsenburg. And she and I sort of became really close friends, and I became close friends with her family. And at one point after college, we're talking on the phone, and I asked her how her family was doing. She says, oh, my parents are doing great, but now they think they're Jewish. And we kind of got a little bit of a laugh out of it, which is a little naive for us because lo and behold, after doing more research and studying my genealogy even more, she recommended a book by one of her cousins, and the book is Hidden Shabbat, and the author is Isabel Medina Sandoval. And in this book that I started reading, I started seeing all of the names of my family. And this book chronicles, in a really beautiful way, a family from the late 1500s all the way to the present day. And it's from the mother to the daughter to the daughter to the daughter. And it's so beautiful the way that she articulates all of the history of that family. And lo and behold, my family's name was in it. And so it was just a really interesting way for me to get started on this idea of Sephardic Jewish tradition. And in my genealogy study, I started seeing stars of David everywhere. And so we finally found out that through DNA technology, we do have a Sephardic Jewish ancestor through the Sanchez family line. Also, some of the things that I learned was about the BRCA1 gene and how it's Hispanic Catholic women from northern New Mexico and southern Colorado were getting this breast cancer gene that was normally normally women of Ashkenazi Jewish descent were getting. And then I started reading To the Ends of the Earth by Stanley Hortis and found out that this idea of crypto-Judaic ancestry was something that people had been talking about for a really long time. I just hadn't heard anything about it. And so in January of 2016, I had compiled all of this information, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, if it was going to be a play or if it was going to be a book. And then my son asked me to write with him, and I did, and lo and behold, Love and Legacy Amor Eterno was born, and the floodgates sort of opened at that point, and it was just, it's just been a wonderful experience ever since. And so this story is a dual love story, a couple from 1598, Catalina and Benjamin, and because of the Inquisition, their families have to split, and he flees to Turkey, and her family goes to Mexico City and up into the U.S. through New Mexico. And so the second love story is Luke and Ariana, and they're in the present day, and they meet on a study abroad program in Spain, and they have this amazing connection that they can't understand, and it's because they're connected to these ancestors from the 1590s. And so I'll share with you a few excerpts from this book a little bit later on, but for now I am going to turn it over to the lovely and talented Elena Claver, who's going to share some beautiful, heartfelt music with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, and also thank you to Dr. Renee Fajardo and to the Fox Theater. And so when Renee asked me to participate in this, I said, well, I don't do any Sephardic music. I grew up Jewish, but my family isn't very religious at all, and I just didn't know this kind of music. And she said, well, that's okay, you can do your music. And so I thought, well, I should do something Sephardic. So I started Googling around and looking for songs, and I found this song that, in fact, I did know, because Richard Farina took the music and the chords, and he wrote his own words to them. It's called the Swallow Song, and I had sung that song. I'd learned it from Richard and Mimi Farina. And so the original song is called Los Bilbilicos Cantan, which is the Nightingales, and I'm a bird watcher, we don't have nightingales in this hemisphere. They're from Europe and Asia. But it's also called La Rosa en Florece, and friends of mine who have played in this kind of playing this kind of genre always say that it's one of the most popular songs. So, and Ladino is very similar to Spanish, but it's a little different, and I don't speak Ladino, I speak Spanish, so you'll hear some words that are a little different. Los bilbilicos cantan con suspiros de amor. Los bilbilicos cantan con suspiros de amor. Mi neshama, mi ventura está en tu poder. Mi neshama, mi ventura está en tu poder. La rosa enflorece en el mes de mayo. La rosa enflorece en el mes de mayo. Mi neshama se oscurece sufriendo del amor. Mi neshama se oscurece sufriendo del amor. Más presto ven, paloma, más presto ven conmigo. Más presto ven, paloma, más presto ven conmigo. Más presto ven, querida, corre y sálvame. Más presto ven, sálvame. Thank you. And this song I wanted to do, this is called For a Storyteller. And it was for an amazing storyteller who I had met in the early 80s named Floating Eagle Feather. And I want to send this out to Dr. Renee Fajardo and all the storytellers that she helps support and promote. And storytelling is just so important. And this wonderful man, Floating Eagle Feather, I met him and then sort of re-met him again a few years later. And through him, I met some other people who became very, very dear friends. And he had been born in Honduras. And his dad was Israeli, and his mom was Honduran, and his grandma was Mayan. And he really identified with the indigenous part of himself, and he grew his hair long. And when he was a kid, he needed some heart surgery that they couldn't get in Honduras, so his family moved them to the States, where he grew up speaking English, French, and Spanish, and also sign language. And he did origami as well. And he was just this magical human being who traveled all over the world collecting these stories. And he was one of the many people who succumbed to AIDS, which was its own kind of, for a lot of people, it felt like a genocide, a real loss. And I was at this winter solstice gathering one time with one of my friends who I had met through Floating Eagle Feather, and we were all doing stories and songs and poems about the winter equinox, the winter solstice. And when it came his turn, he said, I'm going to do a Floating Eagle Feather story, because he passed away in September, and I didn't know that. So I just felt devastated and just really cried and went home and wrote this song. It's meant to be a sing-along song, so please feel free to sing along from your homes, from your Zooms, on the chorus. Full moon shining in the window, longest night of the year, singing songs and telling stories, round a circle drawing near. Then you break the news in passing, must have thought that I knew. Well, they say the light's returning, but I feel darkness through and through. Someone tell another story, hold me close against the pain, help me remember what this night means, that the light will come again, that the light will come again. He floated through my life so gently, like a feather in the breeze. There was always something magic, and an endless warmth and ease. Such a gentle way of touching, like a child without a doubt. Well, they say the light's returning, but another one's gone out. Someone tell another story, hold me close against the pain, help me remember what this night means, that the light will come again, that the light will come again. I still have the purple flower that you gave me, must have been 6 years ago. Folded paper that survived 3 moves, somehow I've never let it go. I remember from the first we met, how I felt under a spell, how our paths crossed like a braided thread. weaving other lives as well. Now I cling to them like living proof of a precious human chain. Well, they say the light's returning, but a shadow will remain. Someone tell another story. Hold me close against the pain. Help me remember what this night can mean, that the light will come again, that the light will come again. Thank you. Please welcome back Kimberly Sanchez.
Thank you, Elena. That was so beautiful. This first excerpt I'm going to read is from Benjamin and Catalina. And at this point in the story, he has just found out that his family has to flee because the Inquisition is on their tail. And so he's sort of in a panic, and he has to meet with Catalina to let her know what's happening. He was quiet for a moment, watching her body tremble. She was sure her face was red with confusion and fear. Reaching for her shoulders, he cried, "Cásate conmigo, Catalina, y te vas tú con nosotros." "Estás loco." She considered his sudden proposal, realizing that once she left, in all likelihood, she would never return. She thought about all that she would leave behind, her parents, her family, her beloved Corral de Almaguer, and the tranquility she found at her sanctuary under the tree next to the Rio Rianzares. But what was it all worth without him? Sí voy. The tears broke from her eyes as she nodded, grasping for his hands. "Bueno, mañana vamos mi papá y yo para pedir tu mano en matrimonio." He said it with glossy eyes and a wide grin. Both of his hands caressed hers before he cupped her face. He stood, helping her up and pulling her close. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. She could feel the tension leave his body. He held her head to his heart and kissed her multiple times. "Estoy contento, calmado, ahora que sé que vienes conmigo." She nodded and held his hand and gaze until their fingertips parted. They made the trek back home, he to one side of the river and she across the meadow to the other. That night, Catalina couldn't sleep with all that was running through her mind. She would be married soon and traveling to an unfamiliar country with the love of her life. As she lay in her bed, butterflies swarmed through her and anxiety filled her mind's eye. She tossed and turned in and out of sleep when a vision of Benjamin came to her. He was sitting on the back of a horse-drawn wagon, legs dangling from the edge and a tear rolling down his cheek. Her eyes were forced open from her sleep with a sharp pain in the pit of her stomach. "Benjamin!" She sat up in her bed, breathing hard and finding it difficult to swallow. She tiptoed to the window, careful not to wake the family. It was pitch black. Nothing could be seen for more than a few feet away. All that was heard were the noises of the night, crickets, the rush of the river, and a horse neighing in the distance. Before long, she awoke again to the smell of her mother making breakfast. Catalina greeted her and got to her chores. Butterflies continued jabbing wildly at her stomach in anticipation of her engagement, when out of nowhere came her younger cousin, Eliasar, running and screaming down the cobblestone streets and toward the meadow and their house. Everyone rushed to their windows to see what the ruckus was all about. In between breaths, he yelled, "Se fueron! Se fueron! La familia Carvajal se ha ido a Turquía. Su casa está toda vacía. Llegaron las autoridades de la Inquisición a las 5 de la mañana y ya no los hallaron." Catalina shivered, feeling the blood drain to her feet. Her vision was real. No era sueño. Es una verdadera pesadilla. She became lightheaded, grabbing the doorframe to prevent her fall. Rumors of inquisitors had invaded Corral de Almaguer months ago. They arrived on horseback everywhere they went, raiding homes, seizing families, trying them in courts, hanging them, torturing or burning at the stake those who committed the crime of practicing Judaism. Since the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, they had all either fled the country or become conversos, getting baptized and sometimes changing their names just to remain in the land that they loved and had lived in for generations. Yet they continued practicing their traditions and their laws in secret. Inquisition authorities had kept close watch over Benjamin's family, under the suspicion that they were engaging in the customs that had been strictly prohibited. Catalina saw her life unravel before her eyes. She threw down her apron and the trapo she held in her hands and grabbed for her satchel and ran toward their sanctuary. Catalina, Catalina, ¿a dónde vas? Ven pa' acá ahora mismo, yelled her mother. She tore through the thick grass, her chest heaving and sobs trailing down her cheeks. Her mother's voice floated through her ears as if in a dream as she worked her way toward the tree. She'd be able to see his house from there. She needed to see this for herself. As she reached their tree, she fell to her knees and gasped for air. She wiped at her wet, blurry eyes and squinted, trying to focus. Across the river, his house stood eerily empty. No horses, no belongings, no one tending to the chores. They had disappeared, almost as if they had never existed. She sat up against their tree with her knees pulled to her chest and created a river of her own with her tears in the meadow. Her eyes burned. They were heavy and swollen. She felt for her bag and pulled out her pluma and the wooden diary she had made. She felt the texture of the soft cover. She had wrapped it with a fine piece of crushed velvet fabric that her aunt had given her from her travels to France years ago. She had made a dress with the fabric, and this is what she had had left over. She pulled the butterfly brooch that Benjamin had given her from her sack and studied it. She sighed as her fingers caressed the thin, delicate, precise golden lines that formed the butterfly's wings and body. She gently shined the brooch on her skirt, wiping a couple of tears that had fallen on it. The tiny emeralds in the wings and the antenna, each adorned with a small red ruby at the top, were brilliant in the sunlight. She knew it had to be worth a fortune. ¿Cómo me pudo comprar esto? But the monetary value didn't hold a candle to the sentimental value that it represented. She wiped her nose with her hanky and pinned the brooch to the front cover of her diary. It was a perfect fit for it. Her diary was her most prized possession. Her very heart and soul had been spilled onto its pages. She felt blessed to have been given the gift of reading and writing. It was where she found her solace. ¿Qué voy a hacer ahora, Benjamin? She cleared her throat, pulled the book, opened the book with the purple ribbon marking her last page, and began to write. 14 de agosto 1595. Lo que sucedió hoy me ha rompido el corazón en más pedacitos que pueda uno contar. El amor de mi vida me ha dejado para siempre. Todo lo que amo y la vida que conozco se va alejándose más y más como agua entre medio de mis dedos. When she had finished, she wrapped it in her satchel and attempted the long walk home through the meadow. Every step was heavy as she mustered the strength to push forward. Even more so, her heart wouldn't let her eyes stop dripping with anguish. As she walked, she lamented at how the Inquisition had gotten progressively worse over the years. For centuries, the Jews had lived side by side peacefully with Christians and Moors alike in thriving communities, contributing to government, mathematics, science, literature, and society in meaningful ways. But over the last 200 years in particular, the success and carefree style that they once led had increasingly become a secretive and anxious one. They were constantly looking over their shoulder, fearing the Inquisition officers. And since their supposed conversion to Catholicism, Catalina and Benjamin's families, like many others, had previously been lax and believed that inquisitors had paid closer attention to larger cities like Madrid and Sevilla, where there had been more concentrations of Jews and now conversos. But in the past year or so, Inquisition authorities had heard word that there were converso families living in and around Corral de Almaguer that had been guilty of being judaizantes, and they were now coming after them with a vengeance. There was no room for carelessness. The royals had toughened in their quest to bring Spain together under Christian rule. Anyone who threatened their vision was to be stopped and expelled or annihilated. In parallel, Queen Elizabeth had also funded several trips to the New World, and people had returned speaking of rich and plentiful lands that they could occupy. For the royals, this occupation could only further their empire and strength around the world. They sent soldiers, priests, and families out to settle the lands in the name of the Queen and King of Castilla y Aragon to ensure their legacy. Now, as the voyages continued, for many conversos, making the 3-month journey to the New World could be their only hope of having enough distance from the Spanish crown to finally have the freedom to practice the law of Moses and their traditions of their God in peace. Catalina walked back home Catalina walked back into her home and was relieved that her family wasn't there. She took a deep breath as she considered her life now as it lay before her. She threw her satchel with her diary in it on her bed and slid to the floor. She was spent, hollow. In the last 6 months, the sun had risen and set with Benjamin. And just a few hours ago, she had felt the paradox of a lifetime of love with him and the precarious journey into the unknown. She leaned her head on her bed and stretched out her feet on the rug that covered the stone floor, focusing unsuccessfully on the newly plastered white ceiling. She strained to make out the texture with her eyes, fatigued and blurred, begging for an easier target to focus on. Her mind fought them, not able to bear another second of seeing images of Benjamin and wondering whether or not he would come back for her. The voices of her family returning home startled her. She heard her mother and father speaking of the Carvajals. She shuddered at the thought that it might be their house the Inquisition may attack next. She needed to rest and pray to El Dios that when she awoke, this would have been all a horrific nightmare.
Thank you, Kimberly. So again, when Dr. Renee Fajardo asked me to do this and said, well, it's Holocaust Awareness Month, I felt that as somebody who grew up hearing about the Holocaust from people in the community, I also felt that it's very important to acknowledge all of the Holocausts that have happened in history in order to really make sure that it never happens again to anyone, anywhere, because we do have to recognize that we are on indigenous land here in Colorado and in the United States, what's called the United States, and that the Native American Holocaust was many, many, many orders of magnitude. And if we don't remember the Native Americans, the Armenians, the Uyghurs, the Rohingyas, the Tibetans, the Palestinians, Hutus and Tutsis, all of the people who have suffered under these kinds of things, then they'll just keep happening again. So this is a song for Leonard Peltier, who's a Native American political prisoner. It's called Dakota Wind. The land of the Dakotas is a land of quiet grace. From rolling plains to black hills, it's a strong and sacred place. Many died defending it against invaders' claims. And the spirits of the ancestors are present in other names. And the wind blows down from the heart of the Black Hills, and it cries across the plains, Dakota wind, blowing all around through the cities and prisons, calling out for justice for Leonard Peltier, calling out for freedom, Dakota wind. In Oglala, June of '75, the FBI came down, attacked a camp of people. There was shooting all around. Despite the SWAT and FBI and goons, the people fled. But left behind was Joe Stuntz and 2 FBI's dead. So Leonard Peltier sits in jail, although the FBI knows that he didn't kill those men as their own paper shows. He's innocent of the charges, and all he's guilty of is defending well his people and the Black Hills that they love. And the wind blows down from the heart of the Black Hills, and it cries across the plains, Dakota wind, blowing all around through the cities and prisons, calling out for justice for Leonard Peltier, calling out for freedom, Dakota wind. So Leonard sits inside a cell, a prisoner of war, and with him are the spirits of those who've gone before. The treaties may be broken, but the people still fight on in the spirit of Crazy Horse and the land we walk upon. The wind is calling out for those who chose to take a stand, to work to honor treaties, fight to defend the land. And if you listen closely, you'll hear an ancient drum. It's the heartbeat of a nation whose freedom will be won. And the wind blows down from the heart of the Black Hills, and it cries across the plains, Dakota wind, blowing all around through the cities and prisons, calling out for justice for Leonard Peltier, calling out for freedom for Leonard Peltier, calling out for freedom, Dakota wind. Well, in thinking about songs that would be appropriate for this gathering, this presentation, one of the songs that came to mind was, this is actually a medley of two songs from the Spanish Civil War. And I don't know about you all, but I didn't learn about the Spanish Civil War in high school. I didn't learn about it until much later. But it was a time before the Second World War when people saw the opportunity to stop fascism before it could spread to the rest of Europe and kill so many people. Not just Jewish people, mainly Jewish people, but also Roma people, Polish, LGBTQ community, mentally and physically handicapped, so many people. And so the people who were sort of aware of this saw that they had an opportunity in Spain to stop fascism before it could spread. And people from all over the world went to Spain to help the Spaniards defeat Franco and the forces of fascism. And they all became known as different brigades. And the brigade from the United States was made up of about 3,000 people. There were people who were black, white, men, women, Christian, Jewish, all kinds of people. And they were called the Lincoln Brigade or the 15th Brigade. Each brigade had its name. And they were called premature anti-fascists. The United States didn't want them to go and looked on them with mistrust. And when it became clear that Spain was going to fall, the Spanish people said to all of these international brigades, you've got to leave because we're going to fall. And so the people, 1,500 of the people who survived the 15th Brigade came home, and many of them then enlisted in World War II once the United States did get involved in fighting fascism in World War II. And so this is two songs that were traditional Spanish songs that got turned into songs for the Spanish Civil War. And I want to also say that it mentions the Moorish people who were paid. They were treated as mercenaries and by Franco, and that's why this is mentioned. But I'd also like to send this out to the family of David and Sophie Smith. She was my high school math teacher, and I found out much later, after being in high school, that he had been a Lincoln Brigade volunteer. This is called Si me quieres escribir, and viva la 15 Brigada. Si me quieres escribir, ya sabes mi paradero. Si me quieres escribir, ya sabes mi paradero. En el frente de Gandesa, primera línea de fuego. En el frente de Gandesa, primera línea del fuego. Si tú quieres comer bien barato y de buena forma, si tú quieres comer bien barato y de buena forma, en el frente de Gandesa, allí tienen una fonda. En el frente de Gandesa, allí tienen una fonda. En la entrada de la fonda hay un moro Mohamed. En la entrada de la fonda hay un moro Mohamed que te dice pasa, pasa, ¿qué quieres para comer? Que te dice pasa, pasa, ¿qué quieres para comer? El primer plato que dan son granadas rompedoras. El primer plato que dan son granadas rompedoras. El segundo de metralla para recordar memorias. El segundo de metralla para recordar memorias. Viva la 15 brigada, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Viva la 15 brigada, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Que sea cubierta de gloria, Emanuela, Emanuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, Emanuela, Emanuela. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba de rumba de rumba la. En los frentes de Jarama, rumba de rumba de rumba la. No tenemos ni aviones ni cañones, a Emanuela. No tenemos ni aviones ni cañones, a Emanuela. Luchamos contra los moros, rumba, 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 la. Luchamos contra los moros, rumba, 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 la. Mercenarios y fascistas, a Emanuela, Emanuela. Mercenarios y fascistas, a Emanuela, Emanuela. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Solo es nuestro deseo, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Acabar con el fascismo, a Emanuela, Emanuela. Acabar con el fascismo, a Emanuela, Emanuela. Ya salimos de España, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Ya salimos de España, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Para luchar en otros frentes, a Emanuela, Emanuela. Para luchar en otros frentes, a Emanuela, a Emanuela. Viva la 15 brigada, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Viva la 15 brigada, rumba de rumba de rumba la. Que continúa la lucha, Emanuela, Emanuela. Que continúa la lucha, Emanuela, a Emanuela.
Thank you, Elena. I love your voice and your music. It's so beautiful. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to the couple from the present day, Ariana and Luke. And she's from San Luis, and he's a New Yorker. His father is Ashkenazi Jew, and his mother is Sephardic Jew. And again, they met on a study abroad program and had this amazing connection that they can't understand. And so she brings him to our annual fiestas in San Luis, Santiago and Santana, which is kind of a little controversial in and of itself because she's never brought anybody home. And so he, noticing all of the things that her family does and says, is encouraging her to look into her ancestry because he suspects that she's Sephardic, but she's not having it. So this is from Luke's perspective. Well, you just charmed the heck out of my grandparents. My grandma was totally surprised at your Spanish and mad at the rest of us for not learning. She nudged him and rolled her eyes. He laughed. Ariana, you seriously have to research your ancestry and do that genetic DNA test we talked about on the phone. What do you mean? Why? Well, for starters, your grandma has a menorah in her dining room, and your grandpa was whittling a dreidel out of wood. What are you talking about? Seriously, the candle holder your grandma has is a menorah. You know what Jews light during Hanukkah? And your grandpa is making a spinning top toy for your cousin that he used to play with as a kid. He described the way you play it, and it was just like how I played with as a kid. And Luke's voice was raising at the end, and his heart was beating fast. What toy? That's crazy, Ariana replied. It doesn't make any sense. We're Catholic, Luke. We've always been Catholic. It has to be some kind of weird coincidence. Her response was a wet blanket on his excitement. He was surprised that she almost sounded annoyed. I thought you'd be more excited about this. Why are you so opposed to the possibility? Why is this bothering me so much? He leaned an elbow on the open window of the car door and scratched his head. I'm not. It's just, I don't see it. I never even knew anyone Jewish until college. But it's so clear, he said, throwing his open hands in front of him. The game, the menorah, the way you speak Spanish. Look. She took her eyes off the road briefly to meet his. When I talked to the genealogy lady from here, we were only able to get so far in her database with the information she had for the Romero side of the family. I know that my grandfather, Salomon Romero, was the first person to come to San Luis from New Mexico with Carlos Bobian and the Sangre de Cristo land grant. That was my grandpa Moises's great-grandfather. His great-great-great-grandfather was born in the early 1700s in New Mexico. His name was Pablo Romero, and his wife was a Mascareñas woman from the same area. We're already in the 1700s and still haven't been able to get past New Mexico, and all of the church records are from baptism and marriage records from the Catholic Church. Ariana finished just as they reached the parking lot of an old building where Luke could see people congregating outside in a grassy area. Her voice was even, and her tone was matter-of-fact. He took a deep breath and rubbed his hands against his denim shorts. Okay, I get it. When they arrived, he greeted Lucia inside, relieved to drop off the pot. He wiped at his forehead and set the pot holders on the table. Ariana's hand grabbed his, and a cool breeze washed over his face. She led him to the side of the building where they were alone. Her eyes were apologetic. She pulled her hair behind her ears and looked at her sandals before kicking a small rock out of place in the green grass. Finally, her eyes met with his again. Luke, you said when we were in Spain that you had some online tools I could use to do more research. Can we look into it while you're here? Of course. Luke was happy to hear that she was interested. I'm sorry. The whole religious thing just freaks me out. But I am curious. It's okay. Whenever you want, we can log in and check it out. Okay, there'll be a break after the cook-off before the family goes to the carnival. We'll miss the Battle of the Bands, but we can go back to the house and check it out then. Great! They drove back to the house after that to do the research. Ariana took out her laptop and placed it on the kitchen table and opened it slowly, like she still wasn't quite ready. She slid it toward him, and he opened the genealogy account that housed the database for his family research. He watched Ariana pull her hair back into a knot and reach into her backpack for a notebook. He could see the apprehension in her expression while she flipped through the pages. These are my notes from the meeting with Maria. The oldest ancestors I know are Pablo Romero, born in 1719 in New Mexico, and his wife, Francisca Mascareñas, born in 1724. Okay, he said as he plugged in the names. Nothing. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. This database is Sephardic. So let's look at this other side. If there was any recorded information in the census, this site will have it. The tension was exuding from her body, and her foot was rap-tapping on the floor next to him. Butterflies began to swarm in his gut. Okay, there are several Pablo Romeros born around the same time frame in New Mexico. What was his wife's name again? Ariana's eyes were glued to the screen, and her fingernail was in her mouth. What? She looked at him and swallowed. What was your great-grandmother's name? Oh, Francisca Mascareñas. She picked up her notebook and set it back down. Luke added the name to the search, and they came up together in the 1750 census as married and living in Taos County, New Mexico. That's him, Ariana shouted. Awesome, let's see what else we can find out. Luke shifted in his seat, a surge of energy running through him. He clicked on Pablo's name, and it listed his parents as Diego Romero and Maria Josefa Trujillo, born in 1696 and 1698. He clicked on Diego Romero and found his parents as well. He glanced over at Ariana, who was sitting at the edge of her seat with her eyes fixed on the screen. With every click, they found more parents until they came to David Romero and Catalina Romero, both born in Corral de Almaguer, Toledo, España. They looked at each other. Ariana took a deep breath and held it for a second, biting a corner of her lip. We'll get her maiden name if her parents are listed. Here, let me, Ariana said. She let out her breath and clicked on Catalina's name, her hand slightly trembling as it hit the mouse. Her mouth opened and she clasped her cheeks with her hands. Luis Robledo and Juliana Beatriz Lopez. They let themselves rest against the high back of their chairs, and Luke reached for Ariana's hand that she had rested on her lap. She was still shaking. He was too. Catalina Lopez Robledo. Luke watched Ariana's mouth read the name on the computer screen slowly in a whisper. He grabbed for her other hand. Ariana, it's her. Catalina is your great-grandmother. Look, I knew it. No way, Ariana said, shaking her head. Her cheeks were pink and her eyes were large saucers. So let me get this straight. This woman, she pointed at the computer screen, is my great-grandmother, and she was the one who wrote the diary? You've got to be kidding me. How can we be sure it's the same person? Ariana stood up and paced around with one hand on her head and the other on her hip. It all lines up, the names, the dates, where she was born, and when she arrived in the Americas. Okay, but Luke, in the diary, Catalina was talking about Benjamin. This means that your great-grandfather and my great-grand were in love over 400 years ago. Luke finished her sentence. He stood up in front of her and took her chin in his hand, caressing her cheek with his thumb. Her eyes were filling with tears. Are you okay? It's just that what I felt at the excavation site and when I approached the diary, oh my gosh, look at my arms. She tried to rub the goosebumps away, on her forearms away. I know. Ariana, it makes complete sense to me. It explains everything. Now it's clear why I felt such a connection to you from the moment our hands touched and our eyes met in that bookstore. And now I understand why I felt like I already knew you, even though I didn't even know your last name.
This is about the fourth time I heard that, and it still makes me kind of emotional. So again, when I was looking at doing this, I thought, well, I should learn at least one or two Sephardic Jewish songs, and so I asked my friend Carla Siaki. We are in the Mother Folkers, the most carefully pronounced name in show business, together. I have to say that so that nobody thinks I'm saying something bad, and so she told me about this woman, Judith Frankel, who had done a lot of Sephardic songs as well as other songs. And so this is an old ballad, and like many of these old ballads, it's kind of a mix of all these different things, and it doesn't always make sense. It's kind of got a little bit of Rapunzel in it. It's got a little bit of Sleeping Beauty in it, and it's also got a number of these words that are not, they're Ladino Spanish. They're not the Spanish that we think of as today. It's called Tres Hermanicas that Judith Frankel collected. And I also want to say that I found some songs by Consuelo Luz, and she is a Sephardic singer who lives in New Mexico, and because of reasons of time, I'm not able to do that one, but I encourage you to look up her music. She's got some amazing songs. So. Tres hermanicas eran, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Tres hermanicas eran, tres hermanicas son. Las dos eran casadas, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Las dos eran casadas, la una se perdió. Su padre con vergüenza, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Su padre con vergüenza a Rhodes la envió. En medio del camino, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. En medio del camino, castillo le fraguó. De piedra menudica, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. De piedra menudica, chichicos alrededor. Varones que lo supo, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Varones que lo supo, a la mar ya se echó. Nadando y navegando, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Nadando y navegando, al castillo arribó. Échales tus entrenzados, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. échales tus entrenzados, arriba subo yo. Ya ha hecho sus entrenzados, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Ya ha hecho sus entrenzados, arriba los subió. Agua no había en casa, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Agua no había en casa, a la fuente ya salió. En medio del camino, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. En medio del camino, la niña se durmió. Por allí pasó el caballero, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Por allí pasó el caballero, 3 besicos le dio. Uno de cada cara, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Uno de cada cara y uno al corazón. Si él, mi querido, sabe, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. Si él, mi querido, sabe, matada merezco yo. No te mates, mi querida, blancas de rosa y ramas de flor. No te mates, mi querida, el tu querida soy yo. Is there time for one more? I'll do a final song, which is a song that I wrote kind of in homage to Violeta Parra and her song Gracias a la Vida. And her song says, thanks to life, which has given me so much. And mine says, thanks to the earth, which has given me life. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida. Gracias al Espíritu, el amor, la energía. Gracias a mis primos que me dan alegría. Gracias a todos que formamos familia. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida, al agua sagrada, la sangre bendita que corre en sus venas, el arroyo y el río, lágrimas y nubes, mares y llovizna. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida, a los seres verdes que se cultivan. Gracias al maíz, la mies tan amadita, desde cada raíz hasta la última hojita. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida, al aire y el viento que por la tierra suspiran, como cantan y ríen, con grito o sonrisa, fuerza de tormenta, ternura de brisa. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida, al sol que calienta, la luz que brilla, la luna que cambia. Cada mes, cada día, el ciclo del cielo, ritmo de la vida. Gracias a la tierra que me ha dado la vida. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena. Music just brings so much to life and to storytelling. take this mask off. I come from a musical family, and just when you hear a song, it just brings back nostalgia and memories, and the instruments just, you could feel it in your heart. So this last excerpt I'm going to read to you is from Benjamin's perspective, and it's circa 1597, about 2 years after he had disappeared from Catalina's life. And so we get to hear a little bit about what he's feeling and what's going on in his mind. Benjamin pulled a damp handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead and then his eyes. He stuffed the cloth back in his pocket and leaned over the railing of the deck. It was early afternoon, and the sun at its strongest in the day was beating down on his face. He squinted across the shimmering sea waves toward the horizon, and a smile curved upon his lips. He scanned the dingy clothes that had been given to him and his gritty hands and feet. He rubbed his wrists and twisted his hands, focusing on the scars from the ropes. A laugh, more like a grunt, escaped his mouth. Estoy libre. Gracias a mi Dios que estoy libre. His hand patted the outside of his baggy breeches, and he reached in and pulled a sketch he had folded until it was small enough to fit in a hidden pocket inside. It was damp from the heat and its position against his body. He carefully unfolded it and stared at the image. Her sandy blonde curls and blue-gray eyes lifted from the page. Her lips parted into a radiant smile that yanked at his heartstrings. A tear splashed against the sketch. Libre sí, pero de qué me sirve si no estás a mi lado, mi Catalina? An ache filled his chest. He wiped his eyes again and put the image back in his pocket. Volveré por ti, te lo prometo. And this excerpt is a good segue into the second two books in the trilogy. Amor Eterno is the first, an introduction to all of this information, and the second two will tell you a little bit more about Catalina and Benjamin and their lives afterwards. Thank you so much again to Dr. Renee Fajardo and Journey Through Our Heritage and the Aurora Fox Theater, and we just appreciate this wonderful opportunity for being here. And thank you for all of you who are joining live stream for joining us. Now I hear we have a few questions maybe? What inspires my storytelling? Well, a lot of my experiences, of course, like any writer and any author. You know, I think this story it came alive because of the information that I had received, and you know, the things that you see around you inspire you as well. And when you put all of that stuff together, it just kind of, you know, forms into this pretty cool story. I was very fortunate to be able to write before people woke up and after people went to bed, and every chance I got after this story started unfolding. And it took me a month and a half to write it, and so it's been a really, really fulfilling and wonderful experience.
Let me see. The first song was Los Bilbilicos, and it's, I believe, a traditional song. You can find it all over the internet. A number of different people do it. It's considered a Sephardic song. And again, Richard Fariña wrote the words to it called the Swallow Song. So you can find versions of him and his wife, Mimi Fariña, doing it. But I've seen it sung by a lot of different people. If you look up Los Bilbilicos, which again means the Nightingales.
I don't know, that would be great. If anyone wants to hire us to have us, absolutely.
Elena, do you have a favorite song to play? If so, why is it your favorite?
I don't think I have one favorite song. It's sort of like asking if I have a favorite bird. There's just too many great ones, and I'm so sorry. But there's such great music. I sing music in English and Spanish, original, traditional, other people's songs. So, no, sorry.
Historical fiction, that's what this is. And yes, so this is a trilogy, and the second book is called Voyage to Destiny, and it pretty much chronicles Catalina's experience from Spain to Mexico City, and really just the ship. What was that like as a conversa? having to live, under the guise of somebody that was not Jewish, and she was still trying to practice her traditions. And it's still told through the eyes of Ariana and Luke. So all the same characters from the first book are there. The third book is about their experience coming from Mexico City into New Mexico with Juan de Oñate and that expedition, and it's called Journey to the Stars. And it sort of comes full circle. We bring Benjamin and Catalina and Ariana and Luke sort of back together, and so I've already got everything planned out. I know how both books are going to end, and so I'm just filling in the blanks right now, and hopefully they'll be released within the next year or so.
I started playing guitar when I was in high school, and I'm pretty much self-taught, and other people have showed me things. I've never taken formal lessons, and then I started playing banjo when I was in college, because my college roommate had a crush on a banjo player, and he wouldn't teach her, so she asked me, and I thought, well, I play guitar, maybe I can learn. And the banjo's originally from Africa, and it's made a lot of different transitions, but that style that I play is called old time or frailing or clawhammer, as opposed to bluegrass, which is a newer style of music.